There are 5 moving from California and 5 moving into Texas and 5 moving out of New York and 5 moving into Florida and a handful of others coming from blue to red states. You do that every 10 years, and pretty soon it becomes very difficult / impossible for the Democrats to win the House or the Electoral College. That's where Texas and Florida, being big successes with no income tax, how can you not have an income tax? Well, ask Florida how they do it. There was an effort to get Trump to support tax increases from some people who had this new idea that we should be the party of tax increase. That didn't go anywhere. And Trump really slapped them down hard. It was very good.
Hello and welcome to the Institute of Economic Affairs podcast. I'm Tom Clougherty, and today I'm going to be talking to Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform about lower taxes, smaller government, and the future of the American right. We'll get to that in a minute, but before we do, your regular reminder, subscribe to this channel on YouTube, sign up for this podcast on the service of your choice, and please follow us on Substack at insider.iea.org.uk. Grover Norquist, welcome to the Institute of Economic Affairs podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us today.
Good to be with you.
Now, you are the president, you're the founder of Americans for Tax Reform. You set it up 40 years ago, I believe, at the request of President Reagan. You're also considered one of the architects of the modern conservative movement in the United States. So there's plenty for us to talk about. Let's start, though, with Americans for Tax Reform and that 40th anniversary first. Look, if we look over those 40 years, the tax burden in the US has fallen a little bit. It's well below the peak it reached around 2000, looking at the data. How successful do you feel like you've been? Are you happy with where US taxes are now? Or are you motivated for another few decades of fighting to bring the tax burden down?
I am happy with the direction of the tax burden. And on that, it's difficult sometimes for European countries to focus as we have to in the United States. We have 50 states, one federal government. And it's so much easier for the press or for public intellectuals in America to focus on Washington, D.C. and Trump and Biden and that sort of thing and miss the 50 states. And that is where you're seeing dramatic reductions in tax rates. And that is where congressmen and senators come from, and that's where presidents come from. So we stopped the bleeding with the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. We got candidates to sign a pledge never to raise taxes. At first, there were 5 Democrats in the House and 2 in the Senate who signed the pledge, and the rest were Republicans. Then after the 94 election, when 96% of Republicans signed the pledge, we swept the House and the Senate. Those 5 Democrats in the House who signed the pledge became Republicans. The 2 Senate Democrats who signed the pledge became Republicans. So now there are no Democrats who won't raise your taxes, and there's almost no Republicans who will raise your taxes. But the vast majority is written in not in blood, but in ink, that they will never raise taxes. So having that be the party's position is sort of a floor that, this is the Brezhnev doctrine. We're not giving you any more, okay? But what the state has is negotiable. What we have is not negotiable. No higher taxes. And by the way, we're fighting for lower taxes. We went into a position in 94 where 96% of Republicans signed that pledge. Before that, from 1932 to 1994, for 62 years, the Republicans only won Congress, the House and the Senate, twice in 62 years. We had a one-party state because the Constitution was designed to not let there be a king, to make the president weak. Unless the country gets invaded, the president really doesn't get to do anything other than veto bills or sign bills. But a Democratic Congress for 62 years, largely uninterrupted, only twice in 62 years. That's like getting up to go to the ladies' room briefly and then coming back and seizing power again. So what you had was 62 years there where Republican presidents, we got the Republican presidency half the time, but as soon as the Republican president left, they went back and passed everything that the president had vetoed or had said, I will veto. So we had one party state for 62 years at the national level, not at the state level, but at the national level. Since 94, which is when 96% of Republicans signed the pledge, a handful of Democrats, who then all later switched parties, they took the pledge. Since 94, no Republicans voted for a tax increase. No tax increases passed if the Republicans had the House or the Senate. Okay. And they've won the House and the Senate 18 years. Democrats won the House and the Senate 6 years. So we went from not having any clout at all to being irrelevant to 3 times as often the Republicans run Congress as the Democrats do. That change came with the Republican Party that simply said, we're not raising taxes, period. And it was believable because George Herbert Walker Bush had taken the pledge to win the primary in 1988, took the pledge to win the general 1988, broke the pledge in 1990, thought that nobody would mind if he lied to the American people about taxes. And the guy who won the Cold War or managed the collapse of the Soviet Union without a lot of blood on the floor, amazing project, okay, to do that as president. Kicked Iraq out of Kuwait without sticking around for 35 years to see what happened, okay? Very successful president, except for one thing, one hole in the bottom of the boat. He raised taxes. Gone. Every Republican looked at that and said, I'm not doing that. And so it was credible that the pledge meant something, the written pledge, because it's like one sentence. It's very clear. No weasel words. Nobody wonders, I wonder if this breaks the pledge. Nobody ever calls me and says, does this break the pledge? Yes, it does, right there, okay? Don't ask dumb questions. And so that difference, and there isn't a Democrat in Congress who won't raise the taxes, and there isn't a Republican who will publicly raise them. Every once in a while, 2 or 3 of them will get some stupid idea. Maybe we could do this. And everybody else looks at them and says, you and what army? And so it goes back again. There was an effort to get Trump to support tax increases from some people who had this new idea that we should be the party of tax increase. That didn't go anywhere. And Trump really slapped him down hard, which was very good.
So yeah, I think there's a lot that we could unpack there. I mean, the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, if I'm understanding it correctly, and you'll probably have the wording down pat, but it's sort of a 2-part pledge. So marginal tax rates can't go up. And you can broaden the tax base, but if you do that, you have to put all of the revenue increase into lowering the marginal tax rate. So as you say, that's pretty clear. So, I mean, I guess one thing I want to pick up on, are you attributing the Republican Party's electoral success since they all started taking the tax pledge to them taking the tax pledge and very explicitly being the party that will not raise taxes? Something you hear in this country is occasionally conservatives here will say things like, well, if we're not the party of low taxes, what are we? And I think, but you're not the party of low taxes for the most part. They've sort of imbibed this idea from America without actually acting on it. But your suggestion here is these guys take it seriously and it delivers electoral success.
Yes. And there have been times when it was a close run thing, where Obama was the president and all we had was enough votes in the Senate to stop something, right? And we held. So 60 Minutes did a profile on me. And what they were planning to do was they designed it to be ready to go the moment the Democrats broke the Republicans and raised taxes. And then they'd run the story about how the pledge had died. The Democrats like to say, well, Grover Norquist runs the Senate or the House. And so this guy from the 60 Minutes says, are you the most powerful? The Senate leader said, Grover's the most powerful guy in D.C., tells everybody all the Republicans what to do. And I said, no, the tax issue is the most powerful issue in American history, going back to the tariff in 1960, the tariff in 1930, when South Carolina brought out the troops in 1830. They brought the troops out over the tariff of abominations, and then again in 1860 with the Civil War. And then back to the Whiskey Rebellion, where troops were massed to fight against the tariff on whiskey, coming in from over Appalachia. So the tax issue and the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, somebody was trying to tell us what to do with our taxes, and we started shooting at them. So this goes way back. It's a very powerful issue. It is where the rubber hits the road. It's where the government and people intersect. Everywhere else is sort of a roundabout relationship. This one is, hello, how are you? Grab your money. What was that about? And that's where people react poorly, particularly with the size of it. So it was that the Republicans fought hard, seriously, and when it looked like they were going to lose, they still didn't give up and never have since 94. And so it's the credibility you bring for fighting it, and for candidates all around the country going, by the way, I'm never raising taxes. And I put it in writing, and it's online for people to see. And now governors, 2/3 of the Republican governors have signed the pledge as well. And then you're in a situation where many of the Republicans in state legislatures have as well. So it's permeated the Republican Party and going since 94 and deepened its strength there. Nothing else changed in 94. It was not, that's what happened. And if you want to say, well, something changed, that's the one thing that changed and kept going. If you point to anything else, it would have been a one-time thing. This is the every 2 years this keeps coming up and has played out for 40 years.
Huh. So, I mean, you can draw a distinction between the level of taxation and how the quality of a tax system, if you like. Now, as a rule, clearly lower taxes are better, but any given level of taxation, you can have a better and worse tax system. And I know this is something you have thoughts on as well, but I've lived in America. My wife's American, so I still have to tangle with the IRS every now and again. The quality of the American tax system does not seem that high. It's incredibly complicated. It's quite burdensome to operate. What have you tried to do on that front? Not just to keep the rates down, which is great, but also to make the tax system better, simpler, easier to understand, cheaper to operate.
The most important thing is the size. You cannot seize 20% of the income of the American people in a nice, polite way. Okay, there's no easy, frictionless way to take 20% of what people produce. That's surf level from a long time ago in Europe, maybe 25% serfs. And what we have worked on is in taking taxes down. We've doubled the standard deduction, so the number of people who don't have to keep all the paperwork. Okay, 90% of Americans don't file paperwork. They don't have to have receipts to prove it. They go because their receipts are not as big as the standard deduction. So unless you've got a very complicated and large tax burden there with lots of interesting changes in it, then you have to keep receipts and all that stuff. But for 90% of Americans, you don't. And it used to be a lot fewer than that. We've indexed the brackets for inflation. It used to be before Reagan that if you got a raise equal to inflation, you were put into a higher tax bracket and you actually had no more real value of income, but you were paying a higher percentage. Reagan indexed capital gains for inflation. And the most exciting thing that President Trump is now talking about doing, and I've spoken directly with him about it in this presidency, and he was trying to do it in the first presidency, is to index the cost basis for capital gains. So when your house is sold and much of the increased value of the house is inflation, take out the inflation, only pay capital gains taxes on the real gain. That's for small businesses that you sell. That's for farms. That's for ranches. That's for stocks that you own. All of that will dramatically increase the value of all property in America, whether it's a house, a farm, stocks, a business. All of those things increase in value. Housing, it's estimated, would increase 20% in value, not in cost, in value, because when you sell it, it doesn't have the boat anchor of the much higher tax on the inflation that Joe Biden left you with.
Yeah. I think, and forgive me if this is wrong, but I think at times in the past you've talked about your ideal tax system being one that taxes one time at one rate.
Yeah.
So probably a flat tax on income or consumption, and that's it. Is that still the goal you're driving towards? And do you think there's any kind of incremental pathway to get there?
Uh, yes and yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I think our statement of purpose is we want to have uh, consumed income tax one time at one rate.
Okay.
Meaning you pay taxes on what you consume out of your income, not what you don't tax is once you've earned $1 and you put it in the stock market or whatever, you pay taxes on it when you earn it, but not again if you save it and invest it and make more money with that. Because you could take it home and buy a popsicle with it, and the government wouldn't care. But if you invest it in Microsoft, they get all pissy and steal some of it. Okay, we don't want to have multiple bites at the apple of your when you earn $1. You earn it once, you tax it, gone. That's it. Here's the real cheerful news and our strategy of the last 10 years and the next 10 years. And that is we have 50 states. We have a federalist society, a federalist system. There are 8 states that have no income taxes at all. It used to be 6. Tennessee, everyone says 8. They were lying. Tennessee and New Hampshire taxed dividends and interest at 6% in Tennessee and 5% in New Hampshire. When we got up there and said, liar, liar, pants on fire, you have an income tax loudly enough, the Republicans said, okay, and they got rid of it in both cases. Phased it out over about 3-4 years. Boom, 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 gone. Now, the other project is you want to move to a flat tax. There were 8 states at 0, another 8 states, different 8 states, with a single rate tax that's not 0. We have added in the last 5-6 years 8 more states that are now flat rate. So there's 16 states single rate, plus the 8 that are 0. 0 is my favorite single rate tax. That's a nice rate. It's better than 3 or 2. So that's 24 total states have a single rate tax. Now we're getting to the point, and there are 3 more that have passed laws where they ratchet their rates down as revenue comes in until they get to a single rate tax. Oklahoma, West Virginia, Kansas are the 3 more that automatic. If they just sit on their hands and don't do anything and don't have Congress come back in session, or the state legislature come back in session ever, the tax automatically goes to a single rate tax. Why is that important? One, it's important because when you get to a single rate and then you want to go to 0, and 12 states now have decided and announced, the Republican leadership, they're all red Republican states, the Republican leadership, we are going to 0. We're on the way to 0. And I only count them if they've actually had the governor and the legislative leadership say we're going to do it, and 2, they've taken real steps to do it. In Arizona, they've gotten to 2.5 flat rate. They have a Democratic governor. When they get a Republican governor back, they'll go to 0. They've gone to 3% in Louisiana. They need to make a constitutional change so they can move some of their taxes around and be able to take them all down together. And then they're going to 0. Our friends in Oklahoma has passed a law to go all the way to 0. West Virginia has passed a law to go all the way to 0. Kentucky has passed a law to go all the way to 0. Indiana has passed a law to go all the way to 0. And I'm leaving one out. Oh, Mississippi. Mississippi has also gone all the way to 0. Mississippi is the state that if Britain became a state, they'd be the 51st state under Mississippi. They're very proud of themselves in Mississippi. But they have been dramatically increasing their standard of living as they've cut taxes in Mississippi. So we are moving states to single rate taxes and then to 0. So we will have a majority of states with a single rate tax in the next 3 or 4 years. We will have 20 states at 0 in the next 15 to 20 years, because we're being very careful. We're taking the rates down as revenue comes in, like this. But we only spend here. anything that pops up above what they're allowed to, what they decide to spend, the teachers union gets to steal some of it, but the rest of it is in permanent reduction of the income tax. So when people say, well, if you're not going to have an income tax, you got to put it on the sales tax or property. No. We're going to not spend it. That's how we're going to do this. Yeah. We're going to cut the income tax by not spending so much. So by taking the spending thing down, like the rate down, you free up all this space. And when you get out 10, 15 years, and some states are moving faster than that, you've replaced that income tax revenue with non-spending. And to give you one example, New York, this is last year's numbers, $230 billion, New York State. New York has 2.5 million fewer people than Florida. When I was a kid, Florida was full of cows and oranges, okay? It's now full of more people than New York. And in Florida, they spend $115 billion, half. Florida spends half as much at the state level as New York does, with a few more people. How do they do it? They have fewer bureaucrats. They work more hours in the week. Up in New York, they have more bureaucrats. They work fewer hours in the week, fewer weeks in the year, fewer years in their life, and they have pensions that nobody else gets. You basically are buying a very happy bureaucracy, which helps elect people, by doubling the burden on the people in the state. So we're not talking about giving up on not spending on education or something, or deciding that we're going to raise some other tax. So across the country, we're moving to flat rate taxes. Very difficult to raise a flat rate tax. Our friends in Illinois, Bolsheviks, all of them, okay? They're from Chicago, completely corrupt, 2/3 Democrat House, 2/3 Democrat Senate, Democrat governor. Their tax rate is 4.95. 4.95. By law, they have a flat rate. New York is 10, twice as much. And our friends in California, like 15, 3 times as much. Why? But even the Democrats with 2/3 majorities are scared to raise that income tax at all because they hit everybody in the state, and they're not willing to do that. So you go to flat rate tax so that if you lose control of the government for a year or 2 or 5 or 10, it's still not going up because the other team knows this is suicide to take a flat rate up and tax everybody in the room. What Democrats like is a graduated income tax, like Karl Marx liked it too. But he's a foreigner. Nobody knows who he is. But anyway, the Democrats like the graduated income tax because they can say, well, those of you over here, don't worry. It's just the small group over here we're going to mug. So you might want to step out of the room. This isn't going to be pleasant. May get a little loud, but it's not you, it's them. This is the Richard Speck theory of tax increasing. If you can't take on everybody in the room at once, you take them out of the room one at a time. Famous mass murderer from Chicago. That was his strategy. And we can't let the politicians take us out of the room one at a time and work us over. That's why the flat rate tax unites taxpayers against the state. Also, when you go to take it down, well, we're going from 4 to 3.5. What about the billionaires? Well, they're going from 4 to 3.5 too. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You look horizontally, we're all going 4 to 3.5. The left doesn't, if they don't have envy to play with, okay, and they've decided it's not one of the deadly sins, it's a political platform. So envy is what they run on. The flat tax kills their envy argument. And as you've got more and more states with a single rate tax, again, 24 already, that's almost half. In 3 years, we'll have more than half. And in 10 years, we'll have even more than half, because you're looking at North Dakota's about to go flat. Ohio just went flat. Missouri's on the way to flat. And we're talking about quite a number of states are going to get to flat early, and then over time to zero. Well, at that point, you begin to think maybe at the federal level, somebody might say, let's have a single rate, flat rate tax. Well, will people like it? Well, you live in a state, Senator, where you've had a flat tax for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or maybe 4. that everybody recently voted to go to. What do you think? Right? So the great thing about federalism is that conservative free market ideas work. So we can start in Arizona. And in this case, we started in North Carolina, where we started to ratchet down the income tax as revenue came in. Now, everybody's following the North Carolina model. That was the first state to sort of scientifically decide how we're going to do it, as opposed to sort of catch as catch can, which is a great way if you do it, but it's hard to sell another state on following, something that you're just doing bit by bit. As revenue comes in over a certain point, you keep taking the rate down until it gets to zero. So you're going to get to zero over time. Could take 50 years, could take 10 years, take 5 years if you really were going crazy. They took Iowa down from a top rate of 8.6 to a flat rate of 3.8 in 4 years. That's pretty good. And now they're going to go on to zero. So when you take a good idea and you put it in one state and everybody watches it work, that's where Texas and Florida, being big successes with no income tax, how can you not have an income tax? Well, ask Florida how they do it. Everyone goes to Disney World. I'm sorry. That's nice, but that's not $100 billion. And Tennessee, they don't have, oil, and they don't have Disney World. So there are quite a number of states 8 states that have a flat rate tax. South Dakota is at zero. Is at zero as well. They have a lot of barren open space in South Dakota. But because you can get something done and everyone looks at it and it works, then you can get other states to do it. The Democrat ideas don't work very well. That's why they always have to Social Security as a Ponzi scheme instead of as an investment program has to be done at the national level. You could never do it in one state. Obamacare had to be done at the national level. They did pass it in Vermont, and they repealed it because it was a disaster. They passed a version of it in Massachusetts in order to let Dukakis, who was the governor running for president, say, I've got a healthcare plan. As soon as he lost, the Bolsheviks in Massachusetts and the governor who put it in got rid of it because they knew it wouldn't work. They wanted to put it on the whole country, but they weren't willing to do it to one state. The left's ideas can't be experimented on. We'll do it in that state, and if it works, we'll look at it. Forget it. We don't want to talk about it. They have to have complete control of government and then jam it down. And then when it's there, if things don't go well, we're not sure that's what it was. Maybe it was global warming. Whatever made the economy fall apart. You can't prove it was my bill. It could be something else. So the strength we have is on the center right, come up with good ideas. School choice is one. Now 12 states have pretty extensive school choice, trying to catch up with Sweden. And they're working, and it's very hard to discredit something that's working because you look like an idiot. And you can always compare the ones that are working with New York State or California, where it's not working.
Yeah. And I think the one of the crucial points you made there, talking about the states and going to flat taxes, going to zero, is that in a sense you're getting there gradually. So you're not doing it by massive immediate spending cuts, even if we might in some cases favor massive immediate spending cuts. Effectively, you're taking the gap between economic growth, and so the growth in tax revenues, and the growth in public spending, which is obviously really helpful in places where you have economic growth. It doesn't help us much in Britain at the moment, but we won't dwell on that. I think the other crucial point there is that you're doing this without running up big deficits and building up big debts. Now, as I understand it, I think state governments, they're much more constrained in terms of what they can borrow and the kind of debts they can build up compared with the federal government. Obviously, the criticism, and I know you'll have heard it a lot of times, is that at the federal level in the US, taxes have come down, but spending has stayed high. If anything, spending has maybe just edged up a little bit over the decades. And I know you're a small government guy and you run a small government organization, so that must really wind you up. Is there anything that you can do about that at the federal level? Can you bring the spending, the deficit, the debt under control?
Yes. Step one is never raise taxes.
Okay.
because the other team gauges how much deficit can I get away with. When Bill Clinton was elected president in 1988, 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president. He came in and he raised taxes, and then his plan was to spend every dollar in the tax increase plus 200 billion, because that's what Reagan had for a deficit. So all this talk about his plans to reduce the deficit, his spending plans written down as to what he was going to do was to spend every penny that came in plus what the market would bear, meaning the political market would bear. And so Democrats look at whatever deficit they can get away with, and they spend up to that. So, and if you give them another dollar, they just add to the total that dollar. They don't bring any spending down. There was an effort when Obama was president to say, well, what if we did $9 of spending cuts and $1 of tax increase? And then they'd come to me and say, aren't you being unreasonable? They had all the Republican candidates up there, like 8 or 9 of them, and they all said, no, we're not doing that deal. What they meant was, well, first of all, we've all signed the pledge, so we're not doing that deal. And two, they won't cut the one in taxes. And when then Senator from Massachusetts, Kerry, ran into me in the Senate office building, he said, Grover, I need your help. We're very close to the ad. He was in charge of this big committee that was supposed to come to an agreement. He said, all we need is 1.4 trillion in higher taxes. I said, I thought the gap we were looking at was 1.2. Yeah, but the president wants another 400 billion in spending in our deficit reduction package. Mm-hmm. So it was going to be all taxes plus more spending. Not that was their plan. And we stopped it, but that was their plan. There was no plan to cut spending. These are mythical things. Democrats don't cut spending. It isn't part of their DNA. This is their friends that get the cash. So how do you bring spending down? The best way that we did it was, first of all, win the Cold War, drop military spending from 6% of GDP to 3%. That was a big help. But the other piece to it was we passed this bill 3 times. Clinton signed it the 3rd time because his staff told him he'd lose the election if he didn't. Welfare reform. We took aid to families with dependent children, the welfare, classic welfare, and block granted it to the states. Did we give you $1 billion last year? Here's your $1 billion. Next year, you get the $1 billion plus inflation, no more, but it had been growing faster than that. Not only was there a limit so that it wasn't going to grow as fast, but states on average cut spending by 30% because when it was their money, they looked for fraud. When it was their money, they asked people to go get a job. All the things that didn't happen when it was the feds throwing the money up in the air and the states watched it be wasted, but it's not my money that's being wasted. It's the feds' money that's being wasted. I think we need to block grant, and this is something that has been put forward by the Republicans in the past. They voted for this 3 times in the House, once in the Senate. We need to come back and focus on this again. Block granting welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, all the welfare programs. Medicare, people pay in for and they get something back. Social Security, they pay something in, they get something back. Those two, they're technically paid for. Not exactly, but it's close enough for government work. The other stuff is you're not paid for anything, right? So you just get the money. Hi, I'm poor, give me cash. What about those other programs you're getting money from? You're not constitutionally allowed to ask about the other ones. So you're my 7th stop, and I want the money. We block grant those to the states and allow the states to ask, what other programs are you on? Are you living in the United States at present, or are you in Nigeria at the other end of the computer? How do you deal with fraud? Well, 50 states will work on 50 different ways to do it, and the ones that work will be followed. I think the biggest step forward is to block grant the welfare programs out to the states. That is a massive savings in spending.
So, I mean, you've obviously been incredibly successful motivating Republicans to keep taxes down or not to raise taxes. with the best will in the world, they don't seem to have the same commitment to reducing spending. And clearly, yes, there are certain areas where spending has been controlled or pushed down. Overall, though, I mean, the impression at least I get is that, Trump is a big spender, big deficits. George W. Bush was similar, maybe not quite to the same degree. I'm kind of interested in the political dynamics here. Do you see a way to actually get the politicians much more motivated about reducing the spending side of government?
Here, you look at Reagan. Reagan actually did bring spending down. And block granted hundreds of programs, little teeny ones, but got them out of D. If you hadn't got them out of DC and block granted them, there'd be 100 medium-sized ones now. Instead, they're all out in the countryside, and when they showed up in Kansas, they probably beat some of them to death and said, "This one we don't want." And others that worked, they continued. But the state made that decision: is this something worth continuing? So I think, one, we do need to work on candidates that focus more on it. This is where governors, historically, we've done well with governors running for president. Reagan was a governor. He had to do a budget. When we elect senators, they don't do budgets. Governors do. And because the states have more leeway to do things, the people who are really impressive are governor of Texas, governor of Oklahoma, governor of Virginia. These are people who've all done very impressive things as governors running states and look to do the same thing at the federal level. So we are producing at any given time 10, 15 fairly competent governors who've actually run a bureaucracy that looks an awful lot like the federal one in terms of both ways to fix things and problems that come up. They've seen this before when they walk into that office. A senator hasn't.
Okay, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, I guess. The other thing I want to pick up on from your last comment, you were talking about the big federal spending programs, effectively, and block granting them out. And you drew the distinction with Medicare and Social Security. So for British listeners, the equivalent of the state pension and when healthcare for people of retirement age. So, and you said that they don't quite cover costs, but it's close enough for government work. One of the things we hear about a lot, or I talk about a lot actually, is the impact that an aging population is going to have in the UK, and how much, if we're not prepared to cut spending, taxes would go up to pay for it. And I mean, the numbers are really pretty scary because we haven't funded anything. We get the money comes in, the money goes out. Current workers are paying for current retirees. No one is building up a pot for their future. There are similar problems, I think, in America, even if they're not so pronounced. So is the aging population, the burden that's going to put on the fiscal state, something that you worry about a lot and something that you see as a big headwind to your work?
Yes, and it was designed on purpose to be like that by the left in order to force the crisis. The goal of the left is to get a value-added tax in the United States. That's why they talk about taxing billionaires all the time. They can't get any money from billionaires. There just aren't that many of them. But what you do is you say, we're going to tax the billionaires, and then you put the VAT in underneath it. We knew the VAT was coming when Bill Clinton said he'd never do that he would consider a VAT, and Hillary Clinton said they'd never do it. And we knew that Hillary was smart enough to lie about the subject. Yes, the left wants a VAT. They can't raise the money to run a proper European-style welfare state. You can't get any more money out of the income tax. There's no more blood out of an orange. We've had high rates of 90%. We've had rates as low as 27% on the top, and we still get about 18% of revenue coming into the federal government. And so taking the rates up on rich people doesn't do it for you. You've got to get into the middle class and the lower middle class. And that's why you see a lot of the very left-wing Democrats not liking the idea of cutting the state sales taxes. They consider that getting people used to a value-added tax. And that's the biggest danger in the United States is the Democrats. Something goes wrong, they get the House, Senate, they stick the VAT in, and then they spend it, and then they go, okay, now try and undo what we did. And that would be a challenge. So we work on making sure Republicans understand that is the danger. It's attributed to Richard Nixon. I don't know that he said it, but he may have. And that is, America will get a VAT when the Republicans recognize how regressive it is, and when Democrats recognize how much money it brings in. And the two will get together and gang up against the American people. But that was Richard Nixon's Republican Party, not Reagan's Republican Party. So I worry less than I would have worried about in '69, but that is you worry about a tidal wave or an earthquake, something really big. I worry about a VAT.
Yeah. I mean, having said which, you said you wanted to tax consumed income one time at one rate. Now, if you got rid of everything else and replaced it with a VAT, would that be meeting that objective of yours? I understand why you can see it being practically very dangerous.
Yeah.
But it would seem to work, right?
Yes and no. Politically, no. Theoretically, yes, right? But here's the challenge. There is a group in the United States that is dwindled in size. There used to be 75 Republican congressmen who were all within the listening area of one radio talk show host who said, we should have a national sales tax, abolish the income tax, and just have a sales tax. And it'll only be 20%. Actually, the way you calculate a sales tax in the United States is if you buy something for $1 and you pay $1.06, that's considered a 6% sales tax.
Okay.
6% of the value. Okay. What they were saying is divide 6 by $1.06, and then it's really only 4 or 5%. Right? So they were going, oh, it's only a 20% sales tax. It's 32 to do that. And as you do, you switch from one to the other. There is a moment, however brief, when you have both. And should you slip and the Democrats win at that point, you would end up with both permanently. And the danger of that is so large that I've always politely argued to the people who get excited about that. You can turn the present income tax into a consumed income tax.
Yeah.
Exempt return capital gains, exempt return on savings, exempt return on investment, just tax in effect what they consume by having them let you know what they earned and what they paid for. And then you could pay a tax on your consumption, not on your saving. Why risk creating a second, by the way, take a constitutional amendment to undo the income tax and replace it with to get rid of it, to make it go away. So for a moment, would you leave the Constitution that allows the income tax there? Oh, we just won't do it. Oh, really? You believe that? Okay. And so you have to abolish it and then put in the other thing. That's a lot of work. If you really, I see what they want to do. Don't tax people's savings and investment. You want to encourage savings and investment. Somebody has $100. It's a good idea that he puts $50 into Microsoft or a small business that he's starting up or whatever, and doesn't consume everything. That's good. We don't want to discourage that. And by the way, he might lose it. So why are you taxing it? So, it might disappear if the company doesn't do well. So you can shift it using the present income tax without any constitutional amendment, and you could do it on Tuesday without danger of ending up with a VAT. And that's why I think any discussion of having the one replace the other is designed by people whose real goal is to have you living with both.
Yeah, I certainly can see that argument. So let's shift gear slightly. I introduced you as one of the architects of the modern American conservative movement. And you've talked about the Leave Us Alone coalition, which I think is great phrasing. And in a way, you're kind of bringing together disparate strands of conservatives and libertarians and classical liberals in America, maybe with very different views on a whole range of issues. But broadly speaking, they don't want the government too involved in their lives and they want to pay less tax. I suppose my question is, to what extent do you think that that coalition is beginning to fray? Or to what extent do you think it's threatened by, maybe by Trump, but if not Trump himself, but by the kind of new right that has emerged around him, which is more populist, more based on identity and everything else? My colleague here at the IEA, Steve Davies, for a long time has written about the political realignment. And the idea that historically you get these episodes where the main issue around which politics aligns flips. And so for a long time, we've been aligned around the role of the state, how big is the state, opposition to the Soviet Union. But maybe we're shifting to something else. And so A, do you see that happening? And B, do you think that threatens what you've worked for over so many years, which is this focus on low taxes and smaller government?
It's a very good question. The Leave Us Alone coalition is, having been involved in politics for a long time, when I would sit in a room and look around as to who was in the meeting, the broad center-right coalition, you'd realize that they were often at odds on various issues, but on their vote-moving issue, they were not in conflict. So the person who votes on the Second Amendment. I know that Europeans never get this, but over here, it's very important to have guns in case the British come back. And with 27 states, you don't need a permit to carry a gun. You can. It's called constitutional carry. Started in Arizona, they'll go, "Where's your permit?" And they pull out their little constitution and go, "There's my permit, Constitution." But so it's a big movement. It's very important to millions of people. Second Amendment, boom. There are people for whom practicing their faith and transmitting it to their children, whether it's evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Mormons, they don't just agree on who gets to heaven or how, for crying out loud, but they sit next to each other about the state should leave us alone so that I can go to heaven and those guys who completely misunderstand Leviticus can go to Hades. And that level of being able to sit next to somebody because you both expect the same thing from an elected official or a party, which is leave my faith alone. And by the way, his too. Okay. At people who homeschool, the parental rights movement, let me raise my own kids, businessmen, small businessmen, large businessmen, property rights people. You go vapors, the 13 million Americans who vape, they win elections in this country. They elected a senator in 2016 who went around to all the vape stores and handed out literature and said, "I won't raise taxes on vaping. I won't let them ban vaping. If you want to vape instead of cigarettes," because the Royal Commission in England, by the way, Britain says it's much safer. And he won. And he said that was clearly what won the election. People brought to Trump, who was being lobbied, "Why don't we ban flavors? Because people really like the taste of tobacco. Let's ban flavors." And they brought to him, "Here's the list of the 10 states you'd really like to carry. Here was your margin of victory. Here are the number of vapors. Here's the percentage of them that say they'll vote on vaping alone. And by the way, that number is 10 times this number in every state." He didn't do that, okay? Because he recognized that he was stepping on toes and you couldn't go to them and say, no, but we're securing the border. It's not that I don't care, but today I'm worried about this. And so by that coalition, and whenever I talk to a Republican group, a state party, a think tank, in any state, and I say, "This is the center-right coalition," everybody in the room goes, "Yes, that's exactly," all these heads are not, "Yes, that's why I'm here. And I know that's why Mary's here. And we're all here because we want to be left alone on this one issue." Now, over time, you get to meet each other. The guy who goes to church all day agrees with the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day, but they don't necessarily have to, okay? You just have to have the one issue that you care about. That continues to hold the modern Republican Party together. There are other guys who, and this happens from time to time. It's called the Oobleck syndrome. Oobleck being a short story written by Dr. Seuss, who happens to be a relative or something of mine from Swedish or Norwegian days or something like that. Anyway, so I'm told. I don't care. But but he wrote this really great book where the king is tired of the four pieces of weather: rain, fog, snow, rainfall, snow, sunlight, too much sun. And he wants something new. So they invent oobleck, the wizards do, and it comes down and it's all sticky and it sticks everything together. It's a disaster. But the king wanted something new. And only when he apologizes does the oobleck go away and so on. So these guys are peddling something new. This happens all the time in American politics. People who are outside of the political structures, who see them look in the mirror and say, I'm like Sartre, I'm like Camus, I'm this public intellectual and the world should be at my feet. And they forget, you live in the United States. We're a commercial republic. We don't care about public intellectuals. We don't. Okay. We read about them in high school and they go, that's it. We're not doing it again. But they go, no, but if I'm a public intellectual, you're supposed to listen to me because I'm smarter than you, which is also not a good way to sell things. And you're doing it all wrong. Okay. Says the guy who's never won an election, or advise somebody who's won an election. So those people go around and they try and come up with something new. The problem is when you've got a working coalition and then you come in and go, here's what we'll do. We'll raise taxes and give money to this new group. Okay. And who are you going to screw with your taxes? Oh, we're not going to tell you yet. Okay. Well, then you're busting up. You're not adding to the coalition. You're chasing you have a known majority here. Reagan won 60-40. Okay. You have a known majority here, and you're telling me that you're going to go give these people money. And has it occurred to you that the modern Democratic Party is perfectly capable of offering them more? Vance, the vice presidential candidate, in the middle of the campaign, which we were doing fine, he goes, we're going to give everybody $5,000 per child tax credit, or meaning a check, right? We have everybody $5,000. Right now it's $2,000. You get a tax credit for $2,000 off your taxes. This would be refundable $5,000. It'd be the most massive welfare program ever in the history of the world. And it wasn't a week before the Democrats had $6,000. I'm sorry. That was clever of you, wasn't it? We were winning at 2. Our 2 was more than their 1. And, but way back when at 6, you can't play this game. How do you not know this? How do you possibly not know that you cannot outbid a Democrat in buying votes ever in the history of the world? So these people who come up with, if you don't understand secondary effects, I'll give you money and then you vote for me. Okay, but you're going to steal the money from somebody. Well, yeah, who? Well, those people. Okay, now what will they do? Well, they'll hate me forever, won't they? Yes, they will. Did you ever count them and them? Oh, and by the way, while those guys hate you, this person has just been outbid. The Democrats just outbid them for you. So now only those people hate you, and those people think you're only willing to give them 5 and not 6 like they do. So now you're a tightwad, which wasn't on the conversation before. The bidding war wasn't there until you started the bidding war. Why would you start a bidding war you can't win? So am I worried that this strategy is going to, they should, 50 states, go show me a state where the modern Republican Party is in the majority and they behave the way you think they should. Because I can show you the states where the Republican Party is in the majority and they're all leave us alone coalition people. There's no Republican governor raising taxes. They're all cutting taxes. There's nobody they're all fighting the teachers union, and giving people more freedom on education. So at the state level, and again, the leave us alone coalition is not some theory that I'm forcing on people. It's observational. This is what I see year after year after year. And finally, it dawned on me as to how come that guy and that guy sit in the same room together and they're both happy. And they'll argue about a third issue, but they don't vote on the third issue. They're tongue-wagging issues and they're voting issues, and they're not the same. And when you get down to it, you've got to ask them, so what issue do you vote on? And that's not easy to get them to tell you, right? Because, but when you do that, you find that our coalition, the Leave Us Alone coalition, not only is helpful. I got a call when Hillary Clinton was running for Senate, 2000, in New York. She was doing a listening tour because if she did a talking tour, no one would vote for her. So she did a listening tour, and everyone goes, "Oh, she's so bright. She's nodding. She must agree with me." And she made a comment in upstate New York that what progressives need, having driven liberal into the ground, they shifted to progressives. They used to be progressives, but that was turned into, was too obviously Stalinism back in the 40s. The progressives were the guys who were aligned with the Soviet Union. So they dropped that in order to become liberals. Then liberals they tarnished. Now they're progressives again. And when they've finally beaten progressives to death, they'll come up with something new. If you have to keep renaming your product, you have a problem. Okay. We're still the conservatives. We're still the Republicans. We haven't had to rename or rebrand on a regular basis. Her comment was, progressives need a meeting like Grover has in DC, where we get everybody together. And the press guy asked me, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, here's how ours works. And it's low maintenance because people don't have anything to argue about. You get the left's coalition, trial lawyers, big city political machines, labor union bosses, people who get government grants, all the various coercive utopians, the people who make you separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass so that on the Sabbath, the recycling priests can come pick them up. And all the various, the guys who invent light bulbs that convince you have glaucoma, all those stuff. But none of those people have anything in common, except they all get paid off from the common pool of cash. So our job is to keep that cash flow low. Then they start fighting each other and pushing people away from the table. Because if that person sits at the table, there's less for me. So I want him knocked out of the table. But if we give them too much money or lots of money, they can add people to the table. They can get new players like in poker to buy in, and be part of it. That's why we have to say no new taxes, no additional revenue, and keep squeezing the cash flow so that they have to stop paying off their coalition so they become smaller every election cycle. And that's what's happening. That's why the Republicans win, right? You have 50 states. What happens every 10 years? We do redistricting. And the 435 congressmen get divided up based on how many people live place. Next time we have it in 2030, like there are 5 moving from California and 5 moving into Texas and 5 moving out of New York and 5 moving into Florida and a handful of others coming from blue to red states. You do that every 10 years and pretty soon it becomes very difficult / impossible for the Democrats to win the House or the Electoral College. That's why they're in a panic, because they're in a downward spiral from which they may not be able to come back, absent some crisis that they then take advantage of. But if we avoid the crisis, they just keep falling. And if they compete by cutting taxes and spending, well, then they're shedding their own team from their coalition. And a Democrat who is told you can't get any more money, has to go get a job, becomes a Republican.
Well, Grover, thank you very much for joining us on the IEA podcast today. Really appreciate your time.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.